Welcome to the Pat White Show.
Well, as you know, there's been a terrible situation, a terrible attack, if you will, in New Orleans. New Year's having to do with on Bourbon Street. A 42-year-old former Army enlistee by the name of Samsudin Jabbar ended up renting a truck in Houston, driving it to New Orleans, crashing through a barricade, if you will, and kills 15 people, injured a bunch of other people, took out a long gun, a semi-automatic gun, started shooting at police, and injured 2 police officers, and ultimately was killed by the police. Now, concern is, who is this guy? Is this part of a terror attack? And that was the original thinking. Looking at all this stuff going on, I don't believe it was. And let me tell you my reasons. Well, Mr. Shamuddin Jabbar is 42 years old, like I said. He was in the U.S. Army from 2007 to 2015, served a tour over in Afghanistan. He was an HR guy and also into IT. Now, after he got out of the active duty in 2015, he joined the reserves, IT guy in that situation, and served there for about 5 years. So he had a total of around 15 years in the military, active and reserve. Now, that's all well and good. Anybody can do that, and God bless him to doing that. HR guy. Now, he got an associate degree and then picked up his bachelor's degree in IT through online. And that's, once again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Many people do it. That's perfectly fine. But here's the other part. Well, he had been married and divorced twice. And his last marriage, the wife got a restraining order against him. And it wasn't good, folks. He owed a tremendous amount of money. Tried to start a real estate venture in Houston, Texas, being a realtor. He did that. He had a license in 2019 that expired in 2023. So he tried real estate, and that's a tough road to hoe, folks. I don't care who you are. Tried that, didn't work out, building up credit card debt, massive debt. He had to pay child support, which, by the way, he never did. So he was having a bad life, a really bad life. So he goes out and he goes on to an app on your phone, your computer called Turo. And I'd never heard of this app before, and this is where it gets really interesting. So he rents from an owner. This is where people who own cars can rent their cars to somebody else. He rented a Ford F-450 Lightning electric pickup from an individual for $100 a day. This is, you don't have to, it's not a company. You're renting from an owner. $100 a day, drove it from Houston to New Orleans, did recordings along the way, said he wanted to kill his family, had dreams. This guy was looking for a way to die. That's my opinion, and I'll stick it to it. But the big thing is, yeah, he succeeded. But here's what they learned. His license plate had been scanned many times at one of the places called Eagle Pass, Texas, which is a home for people coming across the border and sex trafficking of people. That truck may have been used in that kind of trafficking going on with the illegal immigrants, if you will. That truck may be a part of a scheme going on that nobody knew about. Maybe there's going to be something they're going to learn from that. That's what I know. The truck rented, and it may have been used for nefarious situations. So anyway, that's the story. I don't think it's terrorism related. I think the guy was just in trouble looking for a great way to die, and he found a way to do it. And sadly, it happened in New Orleans, right there on Bourbon Street, on a sad time. That's unfortunate, and I feel bad for the families, but now you know a little bit more than you knew before. And that's all I have. Well, they finally played the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans after one-day delay based on that horrific killing that took place. A gentleman running down Bourbon Street and killing, 14 people. Interesting story on him, not a good one. I think he was looking for a place to take people out and himself out, and he did. But the game was postponed for a day. Now, a lot of people go down to New Orleans. They set up their plan to be there for the game and then leave the next day. Obviously, they couldn't do that. And I was kind of wondering how the stands would look, or if people would stay at the game and stay for the game and find a way to stay there. Well, apparently, looking at the stadium last night, they did. They stayed, but here's what bothered me. ESPN decided not to show the playing of the national anthem. Not good. Not good. But the better thing was when the people in the crowd start chanting USA, USA at the end. That was classy. Now, obviously, Notre Dame was able to win the game 23-10 over Georgia. There were a couple of things in there in the game that caught my attention. Probably the biggest one was when the quarterback of Georgia, his name is Gunnar Stockton. Oh, what a name for a quarterback. Threw a pass to Adrian Smith, who's a wide receiver, and he was scampering down the sidelines. I mean, looks like he was going to be gone. What happened was the side judge was running alongside, which is what side judges do, down the white lane. That's the area for the judges to run down. That secure area. Can't be in there. Well, apparently a player was. An inactive player by the name of Parker Jones. He was in his civvies, had the nice Georgia shirt on, very excited. He got in the area, and Mr. Garza, the side judge, ran into Mr. Parker Jones. And there you see pictures of what's going on, how it all happened. That resulted in a big penalty that called the play back and ultimately took the starch out of Georgia, in my opinion. And that's what happened. So, and then to make things worse for Georgia, opening kickoff, Notre Dame, a Jaden Harrison runs back a 98-yard kick. 98 yards. Well, that takes the momentum away. And I'll tell you, in Georgia it did, because the defense of Notre Dame was, well, as good as probably as I've ever seen it for a long time. Final stats, Notre Dame had 296. Georgia had 244. Not too terribly different between the two of them, but Georgia was 0-3 on fourth down attempts. And, okay, you'd understand that. But only 2-12 in converting third downs. You ain't going to win football games if you go 2-12 like that. So, the final score, Notre Dame 23, Georgia 10. Notre Dame now moves on to Penn State in the semifinals. That's going to be an interesting game. How's it going to end up? Well, right now I think Notre Dame is favored, but it's going to be a very interesting ball game between the Fighting Irish and the Nittany Lions.
Well, you probably know that Jimmy Carter passed away. He was 100 years of age, born in 1924. 100 years, still pretty good. He was president of the United States after Richard Nixon and after Gerald Ford. Now, you have to understand something. Gerald Ford was appointed by Nixon to be his vice president after Nixon had some disastrous vice presidents, including like Spiro T. Agnew, some bad stuff that was going on. And ultimately, when it came down to the election in '76, Gerald Ford, well, he had been appointed by Nixon. Nixon had left the office in disgrace. But one of the things that Gerald Ford did, he pardoned Nixon. And to the American public, that was an unforgivable sin back in those days. Totally unforgivable. And so he ran for re-election. And I remember him coming to Fort Wayne and having his rally at the Coliseum. And I remember all that stuff because I was there for some stuff that I was doing for a company I was working for at the time. And but Gerald Ford lost to this guy named Jimmy Carter. Now you say, well, why? Well, it's because America did not forgive Gerald Ford for pardoning Richard Nixon. They didn't. But Jimmy Carter was kind of an everyman. Here he was, governor of Georgia, a peanut farmer, academy graduate, served on a nuclear submarine, had a wife, and he was just kind of the everyman, plain old everyday guy. Well, people seemed to like that and said, okay, you know what? We're going to toss out Jerry Ford because he pardoned Nixon, and we're going to put in Jimmy Carter. Well, Jimmy Carter's Southern boy, and he was, well, he was there when we had the takeover of the American embassy in Iran. That happened under his watch. And in that particular situation, hundreds of Americans were taken prisoner, and held by the Iranians. And for 444 days, I believe it was, a little sidebar from that, there used to be a TV show on called Nightline on ABC. Ted Koppel was the guy who did it. Well, Nightline came into history because of the Iran hostage situation. That's where it got started. And they just kept it airing it and said, well, it's still going on, still going on. Like I said, 444 days. Well, Jimmy Carter tried to get some things taken care of, tried to have a raid in Iran to free the hostages, and that was through the Air Force, and it turned out to be a debacle. It's not even worth discussing. A lot of people died, and it was a bad scene. It didn't happen. So America became very frustrated with what was going on in Iran. We had the hostages, so when the election came around in 1980, well, there was a fellow named Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was an American through and through. He said, no, we are America first. And he meant it. And what happened was America took a look at it and said, hey, Jimmy, you're out, Ron's in. Because Ron, he said, here's what we're going to do. Ronald was formerly a Democrat. He said, you know what? I didn't leave the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me. That's happened to other politicians in today's world too, by the way. So anyway, so Ronald Reagan won the election, but Jimmy Carter, even after he was out of office, he was big into Habitat for Humanity. He did a lot of great things out of office. I mean, a lot of great things. Highly respected, highly honored, and frankly, as a Democrat, he did the best he could do with what he had, because Washington is, in many ways, a sewer. He tried to clean it up as best he could. So did Gerald Ford. But neither one were able to get everything done. But Jimmy Carter passes away at the age of 100. He will be remembered, not as maybe the greatest president, but he will be remembered as one who sort of healed the wounds that America suffered because of the Nixon administration and before Ronald Reagan took over and said America first. Just telling you what's going on so you know a little bit more. So my condolences to his family. I thought he was a great man in a lot of ways, and former Navy, and that's a part of the Brotherhood. So now you know what I think. Jimmy Carter passed away at the age of 100, and wasn't a bad guy, just my opinion. 1. Well, folks, it's no big surprise that enrollment in colleges is starting to decrease. And I'm decreasing big time. It used to be many years ago that the first thing you wanted to do when you graduated from high school was to go to college. That's what your parents wanted you to do because they said, well, we didn't do that, and look what happened to us. You got to be a college-educated person to get a job. That was the mentality. You know, back in the old days, schools had other things for students to do, shop classes, woodworking, automotive, all sorts of different things. But sadly, the schools let those fall by the wayside because the focus became, let's make sure all of our students went to college. That was the mentality. Because remember, all the teachers went to college, and they felt, well, if I went to college, all my students should go to college. That was the mentality. Well, it turns out that didn't work out that way. There were a lot of kids who, well, left high school, went into college, and went in there and went, man, this ain't fun. I don't enjoy doing this. I don't want to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. And there were people who went to college, got degrees, and they're working as bartenders because they got a degree in something nobody wants. That's the problem in today's world. You don't get a degree in something that people are hiring for, you are wasting your time and a boatload of money. Now, speaking of money, for the last 20 years, colleges have been raising their tuition massively beyond what the normal inflation amount is, 2-3%, whatever it happens to be. They've been going up exponentially. Well, you could spend, $50,000, $70,000 a year and end up close to $300,000 in debt by the time you get out of college. And what do you got? Piece of paper. Doesn't mean you're going to be hired by anybody. Well, unless you're an engineer or you can write code or some of those kind of things. But if you've got your degree in women's studies or sociology, ain't much there, folks. And even many people in my field, in the journalism and broadcasting, that's still a tough nut to crack. So, what's happening? The colleges are starting to feel the pinch. And I'll tell you right now, the next 10 years, you are going to see colleges losing enrollment big time. And I mean big time. And here's the reason. Young folks have figured out you don't need to go to some big-time national college to get a great job. They're figuring out there's other places you could go. There are technical colleges, and those technical colleges have got some very, very good instructors. I ought to know, because I actually work at one. But what you're doing is when you go to a technical college, you are learning a skill, a trade, something that you can use for the rest of your life to make a living. And I tell you what, you find the right job and the right thing, you can earn a very, very substantial living. And I have seen kids coming out these technical schools, companies have hired them for 6 figures, starting numbers, because they're in areas that people need, people want, and is growing. Now, actually where I am, our number one thing is our nursing school, and young men and women becoming nurses, something we all need. Where I work over into is things like automotive and electronics, HVAC, welding, home building, all those kind of things where people learn stuff. Tell you what, right now we got a massive shortage of plumbers, we got a massive shortage of electricians, people who work with their hands, automotive technicians. Yeah, ACC certified mechanic, you get a pretty good living. So here's what's happening. Folks are understanding to say, hey, no longer do I need to go to college. I can find a career at a vocational school and learn a trade, a technique, and using my hands is something that's good for the rest of your life. Something to consider. And now the colleges are beginning to realize they've been flim-flamming you for a long time, taking your money and giving you diddly squat. Not all colleges are bad. I'm not putting them down. But not everybody belongs at a college. As a matter of fact, sometimes a vocational trade school is the best thing that you could ever possibly find. It just depends on your circumstances, what you want to do, and what you enjoy doing. Because if you don't enjoy doing what you're doing, don't do it. Find something you love. And that way, it'll never be work. It's always something you'll enjoy. Just my thought on it. Take it for what it's worth.
Well, you probably remember that horrible attack that was done on Israel by the Hamas back in October, 2023? Well, here's the deal. They've found and neutralized another one of the commanders. That's correct. His name was Abd al-Hadi Sabah, and he was taken out by the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF. But what they did was they had to track him down, and they've been working on this for, well, obviously months since this attack happened at this kibbutz. The kibbutz was called Kibbutz Nir Oz, where all these people came in and attacked this kibbutz and murdered or took hostage some 200 people. And this all happened, and Israel said, we're going to seek revenge on this. Turns out they found Mr. Sabah hiding in a humanitarian shelter. Now, the concern for the Israelis was, how do we take this guy out but not injure anybody or not create any big scene or anything like that? He's hiding among the innocent people. That's what he was doing, seeking shelter in a place where he figured he would be safe because, well, he's in with all the other refugees acting like, well, he's a refugee. So he was protected, but they found him. So what did they do to take the guy out? They utilized a tiny, tiny kamikaze drone. Now you're saying, what? Yeah, little tiny kamikaze drone. And they literally flew it into the location where he was, into this humanitarian shelter facility, flew it in, and with the camera on the drone, because now they can see everything, identified the individual, flew up, and, well, neutralized him. That's all I can tell you. But one less person was responsible as a commander of Hamas to kill all the Jewish people in this kibbutz. Now, that's what happened, folks. So, are drones happening? Yes, they're happening in Ukraine with that war, but they're now even happening in Israel. And Israel has some of the most sophisticated, unique, and different drones that have ever been visualized or seen. And they're very effective, can seek out someone, and in a situation where there's a lot of other people, take out one person. That is the ability that they have. That's how we have gone with drone technology. Now you understand something that maybe you didn't understand before. Now one more bad guy is gone, and they used a little tiny drone to do it. That's how technology is changing, folks. Just something for you to think about as our world is constantly going in a different direction.
Well, I want to talk to you about an Indiana boy. His name is David Letterman. David Letterman, like I said, is Indiana's own. He and I are the same age. Well, he's a month older than I am. Both born in the same year, just a month apart. Well, Dave was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, and as a youth he attended Broad Ripple High School, which is on the north side of Indianapolis where Broad Ripple is. Ultimately, after high school, he decided he was going to attend Indiana University, which he did. Didn't do too well, folks. His grades weren't exactly sterling, but then again, he had kind of a different concept of life out there, having a good time, enjoying himself. Ultimately left Indiana University and then went on to Ball State, which back in those days was a teacher's college, they called it, Ball State Teacher's College. And then people said, well, it wasn't as strict as places like IU was. Well, actually, it was a good college, and still is a good college today. Actually, I did in graduate school there, so I kind of know. But anyway, he went into Ball State University and got involved with the radio and television department. And that kind of fit his personality for things he liked doing because he saw the people on TV. He saw the folks who were interesting, funny, enjoyable, and that's what he was. Well, he was working for a station in Ball State, and he got him fired. And the reason he got fired because he was irreverent against certain classical music. That was Letterman. That's what he did. So he was banned from one station and went off and ended up starting another station. And once again, broadcasting was his thing. Now, after getting out of college, he had to figure out what to do. His friends and some of his fellow fraternity folks talked him into going to Los Angeles, go to L.A., get the big time, be down there and be a star. Well, anything in L.A. takes you a long time, and it took him a long road to hoe. But here's the deal. I first watched David Letterman back in the early 70s when he was working at I think it was WTHR, memory serves me right, Channel 13 in Indianapolis. I had just come to Indiana, was stationed by the Air Force at a place called Grissom Air Force Base, which is north of Kokomo, and we watched Indy TV back in those days. Well, David Letterman was the reason you watched Channel 13 weather, because he was irreverent, he was funny, he was enjoyable, and young I was at that time, well, his humor kind of fit mine. You got to remember, here's a guy that, was a regular guy. He wasn't an A student, a B student, he was a C student. But he was funny and amusing. And like I said, ultimately he decided to go to Los Angeles to try to make it. Well, guess what? Eventually he did. And eventually he became very big. And remember, he was on NBC. Carson thought it was going to be him to replace him. Ended up being Jay Leno. Went to CBS, did his own thing for a number of years. But you know what? David has changed. He has left. He left 15 years ago. Said, hey, I'm done. And he is done. Moved back to Indiana. He says, you know what? I'd rather be back here, back being humble again, being a regular person, because he realized something. All the flash and wow and kazam of being a Hollywood star ain't necessarily worth it. Determined he's going to come back to Indiana and be, well, Dave Letterman. Average, regular guy, just like the rest of us. So if you happen to see him on the street someday, go, hey, I remember you. But he now wants to be a regular person, just like you and I. David Letterman has returned to his roots in the state of Indiana, and maybe Indiana is going to be better for it. Time will tell.
Well, in case most of you don't know, I have been around the broadcasting business since 1965 when I got my start in radio at an AM radio station in El Paso, Texas. Number one station was Top 40, played music. But I've been in the radio business, television business, you name it, ever since then. So it's been a long time. One of the things I did over the years was voiceovers for commercials. You'd get hired by an advertising agency to do a voiceover. The one I have done probably the most, and maybe most recognized, back in the 80s and 90s, I did the Shrine Circus TV commercials. The agency wanted a certain voice, certain style, certain je ne sais quoi, if you will. Apparently I had it. But there's a forum out there for people like me, and this guy named Steve wrote this piece on a forum. Said, like most of us, I'm really troubled by the imminent demise of the business in which we've given our entire lives. Namely, that's of doing voiceovers. And he's probably right there. He said, I make a fair amount on the side doing voiceovers. And he said, the problem is, lately I haven't had any work at all. He said, unfortunately, how to market your diagnostic imaging business isn't flying off the shelves right now, his book, whatever that is. So he was doing voiceovers. He said, anyway, I hear more and more AI-generated voiceovers. And I'm hearing them myself. And there's a way you can tell. It's the right sound, the intonation, and even the pronunciation of certain things like cities. Like, if you live around Kokomo, a little town around north of Kokomo, Indiana, called Peru. The people who live there call it Peru. So every town has a different pronunciation. And it's how you pronounce it that the locals know, you know, and a voiceover, a real person would know. Voiceover's a computer. Doesn't know. And you can hear the differences. He said, this whole thing is distressing to me. He said, it feels like the rug has been pulled out from underneath my feet. I'm 7 years old, he said, and given more than 50 years of my life to the radio business. And now it's pretty much gone. I have my little home studio. Haven't produced any spots for over a month now. And he says, I know there's nothing to be done about it, but I need to tell people. And folks, that's what's happening in the radio business. Radio, TV, people like me and people who continue after me, we're being eliminated by AI. AI is not just robots. AI is taking over businesses that we've been doing, our voices, our style, our personality for years. It's disappearing. AI, folks, is destroying the broadcast system as we know it. And if you don't realize it, you ain't paying attention. Well, for me, one of the more interesting things to do on a New Year's morning is finally get up when you can and turn on the TV because, well, they have the parades, especially the Rose Parade, which is probably the biggest one that exists. And so, yeah, I get up and I kind of watch it just to see what's going on. Not necessarily for the floats. I'm not a really big float fan, but I'm interested in seeing the bands, especially when I've got a heads-up notice about what bands are going to be are. That's when they shine. That's when they put on they put on the act right then. And I got 3 bands. I'll tell you what, that I really enjoy seeing them. Now, I'm not saying I'm a big band fan. I enjoy the bands, but these 3 bands caught my attention. Number 1 was the Jackson State University Sonic Boom. Man, they're one of those HBCU colleges, historically black colleges and universities. Hey, they were tight. Man, when they moved as one unit. And they had great music, great sound, great drumming section. Jackson State University, trust me, that group was very good. Next on my list, believe it or not, was the Ohio State University. Now, I'm not an OSU fan by any stretch of the imagination, but their band, pretty doggone good. And I'll tell you, one of the things that caught my attention, when you're at the Rose Bowl, when you go by the reviewing stand, you got to make a corner turn. And it's how you make that turn, how precise that is and how you make that turn, kind of sets you off a little bit. Ohio State, smooth move. I mean, the way they made that turn, it wasn't like just taking a caterpillar going around. It was precise on the mark. Very, very well done. And finally, the one that caught my attention, the one I really wanted to see the whole time, was none other than the Kyoto Tachibana High School Band. They flew this band all the way in from Japan. God knows how much that cost and how many airplanes that took to do it. With all the stuff they have with that huge band, 95% of the people in this band, folks, are girls. Girls! And they have a precision dance routine for the songs, movement, style. That music is hip, and man, can they blow those horns. And they got a great beat. So all I can tell you was, watching the Rose Bowl parade this year was, well, kind of fun when you think about it. Wasn't so much into the floats as I was into the bands. Jackson State University, Sonic Boom. The Ohio State University, superb moving and great when they went around the corner. And finally, the Kyoto Tachibana Band. Whew! What a band. That was worth the price of admission alone. Just my review, just my feelings about seeing those bands at the Rose Bowl parade. Never been there, never performed in it. But boy, those kids who did, they deserve the hats off. Good. Well, no, good. Better than good. Great. That's what I think, my opinion, and my opinion alone. If you saw it, you know what I'm talking about. So, Happy New Year. Well, in the world of automobiles, the biggest talk lately going on is electric cars, whether they're good, they're bad, whether we should have them or should not have them. And obviously, when government gets involved trying to mandate that everybody have an electric car, the trouble is, a lot of people understood electric cars are not the be-all, end-all in the entire world. They have problems. Electric cars up north in the cold and snow, electricity and cold, they don't work really well. Batteries, massively expensive. And then everything you got to do to go through to mine all the stuff, and that's from countries clear across the pond. You got to get the minerals from it to make the batteries. And not a good plan there either. And then, when that battery wears out, let's say you buy a used electric car, you know what's going to cost you to get that replaced? Oh, and finally, the insurance companies. They don't want to insure electric cars. Just watch them sitting there and go up in flames. That happens. And the fire departments hate it because if they got to put out a fire in an electric car, you can't use water. Water and electricity, electric cars don't mix, folks. So they have to have special fluid, special dousing liquid to use. Very expensive and very difficult to pull around on your vehicles. So that's tough for fire trucks. But who produces the most electric cars? You ever wonder about that? Well, I got the skinny on that. 93.5 million are produced. All right, that's the number. How many they make? Turns out that 32.3% of that 93 million are made by China. China is the big dog making the electric vehicles. Who's second? Well, believe it or not, the U.S. is 11.3%. And third, well, Japan. So between Japan, China, and the U.S., that makes the majority of the electric cars that people aren't buying anyway. And you take a look at Mexico, 4.3%, South Korea, 4.5%, Germany, 4.4%, and Canada makes 1.7%. Now, what are we talking here? People making electric cars. The problem is, who's going to buy these things? And more of these are piling up on dealers' showrooms and lots because people don't want electric cars. Those who have them are going, hey, this ain't a good plan. Now, manufacturers are making changes and they're now producing hybrids, sort of part machine, part electric train. You know, a little bit of both. Those seem to work and you can get around. You know, me personally, I've driven from Indiana down to Florida straight, 15 hours. You're driving, what, 1,100 miles? Can't do that in an electric car. It ain't going to happen. So you got a lot of expense. So the point I'm trying to tell you is people are producing them. China's got the most to lose. And they're pushing the hardest to make you get an electric car. Why? Because they've got a whole boatload of them they got to get rid of. Now you understand how the game is being played and who the main players are. Well, the New York Post newspaper has just come out with a scathing editorial about journalists. Yeah, people that they employ, people that companies employ, and they're talking about what happened involving Joe Biden and the fact that journalists across America covered up what they knew was going on with Joe Biden's physical, mental decline, if you will. The dyslexia, all the mental situation that was going on since he went into office. Dyslexia is probably not the right term to use, but he became, he was suffering from a mental acuity situation. And the Post took a vicious editorial and said, quote, "No one who perpetuated, concealed, or ignored this grotesque scandal should ever live it down." Now that came from the New York Post, not the New York Times or the Washington Post, because that editorial was aimed at their reporters, aimed at the reporters on MSNBC, on NBC, CBS, ABC, even the press secretary for Joe Biden, because they stood there and lied like a rug. Hate to use that term, but that's exactly what happened. And the New York Post is saying this is unconscionable. This shouldn't be allowed. The purpose of the fifth estate, the media, is to tell the truth, unvarnished. Take both sides on it. That's fine. That's what they're supposed to do. But when you become part of a political system, a political party, and a political ideology, you are no longer a journalist. You're an opinionist. And that, my friends, is a big, big problem. But that's what's happened in journalism. You see all these television networks saying, "Oh, here's the way it is," and you'll later find out, I'm telling you the truth. The belief America has in our media today is at its lowest point that it's ever been. People don't believe what's being told to them, and they're seeking out other sites, other places where they hope to get a more truthful news, because they aren't getting it from the major networks, because they have jumped into bed. Now you take the newspapers, Washington Post, the New York Times, they're about as leftist as it gets. And if you try to say anything else, you will be canceled. You'll be in the cancel culture you'll be put away. So, the New York Post is done with the editorial, said no one should live it down. The problem is the media, as we know it, doesn't care. That's as long as you're buying their stuff, reading their stories, and watching the television networks, they're saying, we're going to keep spouting what we want to spout. That's where we've come, folks. We are no longer an unvarnished media. It has now turned into this tribe against that tribe. And that's the way it is. Regardless of what the New York Post writes, it sadly will probably continue.
Well, one of the things you have heard President, or about to be President Trump, said that he is going to be able to solve the Ukraine war in one day. Now, there's a lot of people scoffing about that, saying there's no way, he can't do that. Well, let me give you a little history about what's going on in Russia so you can understand why what Donald Trump is saying might pretty well happen. Here's the deal. Back in the 1980s, Russia was actually fighting in Afghanistan. A lot of folks don't remember that, but they were. It was sort of like what we were doing fighting in Afghanistan. Neither one of us, frankly, won. Well, Russia suffered 7,500 deaths in the fighting in Afghanistan, and so they ultimately pulled out and said, no, this ain't worth it. So what happened was, all the people in Russia went back and they started drinking, because that's what they do in Russia. They drink a lot. I mean, a whole lot more than you would possibly imagine, because the number of people dying of cirrhosis of the liver and those kind of ailments tied to alcohol has shot up in Russia to a massive level. And I mean, it is big time. It's really gotten bad. Now, here's the reason. The price of a liter of vodka in Russia is about $2.20. You heard me right, about $2.20 for a liter of vodka. And brandy, people drink that too. The deaths are amazing. Well, all right, here's the deal. So, in the Afghan war, like I said in 1980, there ultimately were 15,000 killed when you add everything up and what happens from the Afghan thing. So there was 7,500, then it went up to 15,000. So ultimately, let's say they had 15,000 killed in Afghanistan. But let's compare it to now. Russia's in a war now with Ukraine. From February 24th, 2022 until November 19th of 2024, so that's about a little over 2 years.
Well, that's the way it was back some months ago. Russia lost about 100,000 men, and that was a while back. Well, now here's the situation. In Ukraine, Russia has lost roughly 700,000 people as compared to 100,000. Ukrainians have lost about 100,000. The numbers have changed dramatically, and the reason is simple. Ukraine found a unique way to fight Russia. They decided to utilize drones, and I mean drones of every size, shape, everything you could possibly think of. They figured out a way to take weapons and strap them onto drones and turn them into kamikaze drones. They're all over the place. As a matter of fact, you take a look, those 3D printing machines. Ukraine per capita has more of those machines in their country than any other country in Europe. Everybody's printing up parts for drones, and they're using them all over the place. And young people who are great at using drones, it's a war with them, except it's not a war game, it's real war. They're actually using them to kill things. They drop in all over the place, mostly at night. People can't see them. The Russians are afraid of them because, well, what do? Tiny drone you don't know that comes in, it drops into your tank and explodes. That's what they're doing. So Russia says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Going to get our own drones. Well, they went to Iran and got some of the Shahed drones from Iran, but they run at about 113 miles an hour. Ukrainians have figured out how to shoot them down with their drones. It's turned into a big, giant mess, and I'm sure Putin would like to get this thing over with. He ain't winning, he's losing. And he brought in those North Korean troops. Some of them are defecting. They don't want part of this. And they don't understand the concept. So once again, the folks in Ukraine are doing the best they can with what they have. Will this end up in a stalemate? My guess is eventually, yes, it will. Will there be a line drawn in the sand? Yes. And will the person to do it will be Donald Trump? Well, my guess is that's exactly what's going to happen. Now you know the story, and let's see how it all plays out.